Hey, how's it going? I'm Deep in the Reads, and for this video I'm doing something a little bit unusual for me. That is to say, I'm doing a book haul. I don't normally do book hauls because I don't normally buy books. Most of the books I accumulate throughout the year are from Christmas and my birthday, and for the rest of the year I tend to only get like a handful of books, right? And the biggest reason for that is because my big project for the last few years has been to make my way through all of the unread books in my collection. And I've been doing pretty well with that, with restricting how many books I buy and all that stuff. But recently something inside me broke, and I ended up accumulating 5 books in the span of a month. So I thought, why not talk about them? Why not talk about the circumstances of why I ended up getting all of them? And as a bonus, I'll also talk about other books that I bought earlier this year. This all started because I told myself, you know, it's been a while since I've got a new book, why don't I go to a thrift store and pick something out? So I went there, I found a book called Lenin's Political Thought by Neil Harding, and it was like 700 pages just detailing the evolution of Vladimir Lenin's political ideology. And I had already read something sort of similar on Stalin, and because I'm so interested in the Russian Revolution and all of the politics that came with it, I thought, why don't I get this? But I said, let's not buy it now. It might have a terrible reputation. Let's go home first and research it. Nobody's gonna buy a 700-page Lenin book, okay? So I went home, I researched it, and it turned out to have a really good reputation, actually. So I went back, I knew it was gonna be there, and what do you know? It wasn't there. So I said, there's no way I'm leaving this thrift store without fucking finding something to buy. And so I did. It's called The Path to Power: The Years of Lyndon Johnson, Volume 1 by Robert Caro. Robert Caro is the very well-known biographer who wrote The Power Broker, which is a 1,400-page biography on an urban planner in New York. A really appalling book, but probably one of the best biographies I've read in my life, even though it's incredibly long. But Robert Caro outdid himself when it came to this biography series on Lyndon Johnson. There are currently 4 books in the series. He's working on a 5th book. He's probably not going to live to see the end of it because he's like 90-something years old. But he did write the 4 books, like I said, and each of them are about 1,000 pages each. So, a 4,000-page series on Lyndon B. Johnson that isn't fucking finished yet. And I hear that it is an absolute masterpiece of biography, if ever there was one. It's won, I think, more than 1 Pulitzer Prize, so that's kind of a massive accomplishment. And so, the Years of Lyndon B. Johnson have been on my list of books to read, or series to read, before I die. I just haven't been able to find any, so it was just good luck that I happened to find this right when I was so disappointed about missing out on that Lenin book. I'm really curious to learn about Lyndon B. Johnson. He's such a polarizing president. On one hand, responsible for a lot of civil rights legislation, a lot of programs to help the poor, but then on the other hand, he was as misogynist as you can get, pretty much batshit crazy. Look at the war in Vietnam and how that escalated and all the horrors that the United States inflicted on that country under Lyndon B. Johnson and of course under other presidents too. So I really want to know about how this guy who came from the absolute bottom rung of dirt poor poverty in Texas rose to the highest office on earth, how he controlled the Senate with an iron fist, all of this. I have to obviously see if I'm up for reading all 4 parts of this. I don't know if I will be, but at least I'll know after I read this. So after I got that massive book on Lyndon Johnson, I said, wow, I just bought another gigantic mammoth that'll probably take me at least a year to get around to reading. That wasn't very smart. I'm not going to get any more books. And so I was walking around, I went past one of those mini free library things, and I know that they're usually full of stuff like Danielle Steele romance novels or Dr. Phil self-help books, and I'm like, there's not gonna be anything for you there, come on. But I better check to be safe. And so I did, and I found Roadside Picnic by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky. This is a Russian science fiction novel that I've been wanting to read for years, ever since I saw Stalker by Andrei Tarkovsky, which is his adaptation of the book. It's a loose adaptation, he took a lot of creative liberties with it. So the book is about the alien equivalent of a roadside picnic. Like, what if aliens were just traveling through the universe and they decided to stop off somewhere, but they leave some of their garbage for, like little ants to find, and the little ants in this case are people who can't comprehend what the aliens have left behind, but they know that they have strange powers. So now it's about these people called stalkers who go into the zone of interest left by these aliens that's been, I guess, barricaded so that people aren't supposed to be able to get in. I know in the movie it's about wish fulfillment, like what is the deepest desire of your heart? It will come true if you're in the right spot within the zone. I'm not sure how close the book follows that, but it's really interesting because I just realized I was holding the back to the camera the whole time. It's really interesting because this book was heavily censored when it first came out in Russia, and so the translations that came out from it were from the heavily censored version. So I was like, oh, this is probably the bad translation, right? But I checked, and nope, this is the translation that I want, so it's perfect. It's exactly the book I've been looking for at least several years now. I mentioned this book earlier on my channel, like probably a couple of years ago. So it's really cool that I just found this in a free library, and I'm gonna make a point to try and get to it this year, if not early next year. Just a few days after I found Roadside Picnic in a free library, I went to a cafe with a friend, and wouldn't you know it, that cafe had closed. So we were like, alright, let's just walk until we find another place where we can go in and sit down for a bit. And so we found another cafe. There's all this art on the walls, these old records, a ton of books. So we were like, wow, this place is really cool. And so we both kind of zeroed in on that bookshelf, and pretty quickly I happened to spot Orientalism by Edward Said. And I looked at the sticker on the back, it said $21, and I'm like, I'm not really feeling like spending that on a book today. My friend, though, had found some books and asked how much they were. And the guy said, every book is $2. And I was like, you don't say! So I bought Orientalism, and now I have to fucking read it. So, Orientalism is a book that came out in the late 70s by a Palestinian cultural critic and political theorist named Edward Said, and it was massively influential when it came out. It addresses the history between what we call the Orient and the Occident, or the West, and this otherizing that has happened in the West and how they view the exotic East and the decadent East and the barbaric East throughout, like, all of history, right? So we're not just talking like the Greeks and the Persians or the Crusades or any of that. We're going all the way to modern day, talking about how we engage with Eastern culture, in air quotes, through this lens of exoticization and romanticization, which is sort of dehumanizing in a lot of ways. So this kind of rips all of these myths apart, going through all of this cultural damage that's been done, all of the colonial history of it, and this book has since become an absolute staple for anyone who is studying the East, especially the Middle East, in college or university. It's very important in anthropology now. It's like a quintessential staple book, and I did read parts of it in university when I was doing art theory and criticism. So I've been familiar with this book for at least a decade, so to finally have it and say, I am definitely going to read it, is kind of a way of honoring all of my university professors, it seems. And I know it's going to be dense and academic, and some of it's probably going to go over my head, but I'm pretty eager to read this one, so I will try to get to it sometime next year. By this time, I was pretty well set for books to read for the next little while. So I made the mistake of going to my library, and I made the mistake of checking out the discard cart, which normally is full of like foreign language books or weird self-help books or like magazines that are clearly way too dated for anyone to care about anymore. But this time, I found two books I was interested in. One of them was kind of mildly of interest, and then the other one I felt like I had absolutely struck gold. So let's get this one out of the way first. The book is called Jin Ping Mai, or The Golden Lotus, which is a very famous Chinese novel. Now, I hadn't heard about it before I fucking found it in the cart, but I looked at the back, I saw it was really well-regarded Chinese literature, and I'm like, oh, well, I've never read a novel from China before, and this seems like an interesting place to start. So I went home and I researched it, and it was written in the 1600s. It's what they call a novel of manners, so it's like a, kind of like Pride and Prejudice, where it's like a story set within the cultural mores of a certain place and time. I think this story tells the interweaving lives of these three women. I looked into it further, and apparently this is very much abridged. This is very edited down from the full version, even though it's a very thick book, because apparently the unabridged version is absolutely gigantic. So not only that, but this is also considered a pretty dated and rough translation. So once I got it home and researched it, I'm like, I don't know if I even really want to keep this. I might just pop it in a free library, or I might give it a shot, you know? Has anyone watching this video heard of this book or read it, or like, should I hold on to this? What do you think? I don't know. I'm kind of iffy on it, but yeah, that's that book out of the way. Now, the book that I'm really keen to talk about and show you is this massive coffee table art book on Art Nouveau by Norbert Wolf, which was also on the discard cart at the library. This must have been one of those cases where they're trying to make room, so they just get rid of a book that hasn't been taken out in a really long time, because this is pristine. It's so beautiful. When I found it, I couldn't believe it. Look, it's got like gold pages on the end there, and the prints inside it are just gorgeous. It's hardcover with a dust jacket, and it doesn't look like, it looks like it's pretty much right off the shelf. And so, if you don't know, Art Nouveau was an art movement that absolutely blew up in the late 1880s and stayed really popular throughout Western Europe until basically the start of World War I. It started when the Vienna Secession movement began. This was when a lot of artists in Vienna decided they'd had it with the old academies. They were too stodgy and confining for what they wanted to do with their respective media. So they all left and formed their own art school. This included people like Gustav Klimt, for example, but other artists that were prominent in the movement later were Henri Toulouse-Lautrec and an architect named Antoni Gaudi. And if you're not familiar with these names, if you've seen the Lord of the Rings movies, the elves are designed heavily based on Art Nouveau. So think of like Lothlorien and all of their flowing, beautiful lines in their architecture, in their weapons, and their outfits. Very much drawn from Art Nouveau as a source of inspiration. They were sick of the industrial world and all its dirtiness and mass production and all of that stuff. So they wanted to get back to nature in a way. So they were really interested with organic shapes and lines and curves. And you can really see that in the way that they draw things. Their gorgeous use of line and tone is just heart-stopping for me. The architecture of Antoni Gaudi is so playful and strange and alien. It feels like it's right out of a fantasy novel. Even aside from reading this book, which I do want to do cover to cover, I can't help but just spend time with it looking at all the pictures, because so much of the art is really beautiful. Like, not just the the paintings and the buildings, but also the way that they designed things like furniture and clothing. And this book does an excellent job of showcasing it. You've got full page spreads all the way throughout. It's all in color. Just such a beautiful find. And like I said, I found it for free, and I'm betting you that this book is probably worth somewhere in the ballpark of $40 to $50 new. And as someone who finds and collects art books, I think I really knocked it out of the park with this one. Okay, it's time for the bonus round. I'm going to go over the few other books that I bought this year. These are much earlier purchases that were not part of this finding spree that I just went through. So the first of them is The Feast of the Goat by Mario Vargas Llosa. Llosa was a Peruvian author and considered probably one of the best modern South American writers alive. That is, until he passed away earlier this year. So, what is it about? Well, there's this guy whose name was Rafael Trujillo, and he was the dictator of the Dominican Republic in the 60s, and I'm pretty sure he was installed by the United States, which the United States is very good at doing. I'm reading a book on Vietnam, and hoo boy. So this book is sort of a historical fiction. This woman is looking back on her life and her experience living under this dictatorship where people were being killed en masse, and it talks about his, Trujillo's inner circle and trying to get in good with him, or maybe you would get killed. Just a historical fiction book about a dictatorship in the Dominican Republic from one of South America's most prominent authors who just passed away. I'm really excited to get into it and see why Mario Vargas Llosa was considered such a massive loss when he passed away earlier this year, and why he's so well regarded. Next up is another book that I got earlier this year, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman by Mary Wollstonecraft. Mary Wollstonecraft is the mother of Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. And she's best known for being basically like a proto-feminist, and this book is considered like the foundational text of feminism. It came out, I think, in 1793, and it goes into detail about how women are trapped in society, how society is catered to men, men control women's fates in such an inexorable way, and wield that power in a really brutal manner. Often women treated like property and all this stuff, and so Mary Wollstonecraft wrote this sort of massive takedown of what was happening, and this hope that maybe we could find a way to be better and more egalitarian. This is a really highly regarded work. It's incredibly famous, so I'm glad to finally be getting it so that I can read it and sort of understand why it was such a big deal in the context of all of the other political movements that were going on during this very turbulent time in Europe's history. I am, like I've talked about on here before, interested in political theory all across the board, especially if I feel like I can get something out of it myself. And as someone who has the crazy idea that equality is like a good thing, man, I feel like this is a book that I should definitely read. So again, this is another book that I'm hoping to get to this year. There's like a 95% chance that I will, and when I do, I am eager to come on here and talk to you all about what I thought of it. The next book I want to feature for this video is one that I found at a charity book sale, which was raising money for the Women's Philharmonic group that plays in my city. They have a book sale every year, a lot of very niche stuff that you feel like has been squirreled away in somebody's attic for decades and finally brought out or whatever, and they're all very reasonably priced, so I go usually every year. And this year I went and I found Rembrandt's Eyes by Simon Schama, which is a huge non-fiction book about Rembrandt and the world that he lived in. Rembrandt is, of course, probably the most famous Dutch painter of all time. He was painting in the 1600s when the Netherlands was like the corner, the absolute center of trade in all of Europe. I mean, a lot of people say that that's where capitalism started, you know what I mean? It was the heart of empire, the heart of commerce, international trade, all of this stuff. So The Netherlands was like the cultural crown of the world for just a flash of history. And during that flash of history, Rembrandt was the bee's knees. Him and Vermeer, I should say. So anyway, Simon Schama is quite possibly the most pretentious man in all of Britain, and that is saying something. I've tried to read one of his books before. Very flowery. He loves to use words like hyperannuated when he could just as easily have used a word like old guy. But failing all that, he's also very knowledgeable about art history. That's his main focus. He was the host of a docu-series on BBC called The Power of Art, which I saw right as I was going into art university, and I will say that docu-series changed my life in terms of showing me what art could be, what it could do, how it could change the culture, how culture could change art, and things like that, and how learning about art is really learning about history. So, it stands to reason that a guy like that would write something like Rembrandt's Eyes. And Rembrandt's Eyes is considered a really, really great art history book. But it's obviously very dense because I know how Simon Schama writes, and I've heard that it takes like 100 or 200 pages before Rembrandt is even born, because first he has to set up the world and the culture that he grew up in, the empire that he was come into, and the artists who came before him, like Peter Paul Rubens. So this book might wear me out, even though I love the subject matter and I love Rembrandt as a painter. I do find Simon Schama to be pretty exhausting as a writer, but I am eager to try and tackle it, so hopefully I'll do that. And the other thing I should mention is these pages are all very glossy because they have full-page prints of Rembrandt's art. So not only is it an amazing piece of art history, from what I've been told, but it's also a great coffee table art book. So I got another art book to show you, and this one was only like $4 or $5, which again, great deal. And I've been looking for this one in particular for a while. This was actually the book I wanted to read to start in my Simon Schama adventure. But anyway, yeah, that's it for that huge one. These final two books I'm not going to spend much time on. I've already covered one of them on this channel, but I just thought I should be a completionist and talk about every book that I bought this year, so here's the last two. I've already read them. Scarborough by Catherine Hernandez and Red Harvest by Michael Cherkas. I just did a review of this one. Nobody fucking watched it, so who cares? This is a graphic novel about the Holodomor, which was the mass starvation of millions of people in Ukraine by Stalin's Soviet Union in the 30s. It's kind of told like Mouse, where it's sort of an old man is looking back on his life and his trauma, and you learn about how he got separated from his family and how he had to flee the country and all the starvation and horror that he saw, but it's sort of done in a tasteful enough way that I'd say it would be suitable for like 7th or 8th graders to learn about this very dark chapter of history. Yeah, it's not going to blow your mind or anything, but it's interesting, and it's by a Canadian author, and I have to support Canadian. And this other one, Scarborough, is also by a Canadian author, Catherine Hernandez. This was shortlisted for the Canada Reads Award in, I think, 2022, and it's about a borough of Toronto, which has a really bad reputation for being very poor, very crime-ridden, very rough, and so it gets into the lives of these kids who all are forced to move at the start of the book through various circumstances, like fleeing an abuser or being evicted or what have you. And they all kind of meet at this after-school program run by this Muslim woman who is trying to just help these kids out. So it's a very sort of formulaic way of approaching stories about kids in the slum or whatever. And it started off strong enough, but I think it just completely fell apart in the second half, and I ended up really disappointed with it. Maybe I'll do a full review of this one. I think it would be interesting for me to talk a little bit more about Canadian literature, even if I would ostensibly be ripping it to pieces, but that's fine. I still think it was, you know, decent enough considering I only paid a few dollars for it, and yeah, that's it. That is every book that I bought this year, and gosh darn, I am not buying any more. Let's get them up on the table and see what they all look like together. So, here are all the books that I've acquired throughout this year, all grouped together for the family photo. And I get mixed emotions when I gaze upon this brood. On one hand, I feel deep shame because I was supposed to be able to get through all of the unread books in my collection in a reasonable time period, and while I have been making good progress every year for the last few years, that's no excuse to acquire this fucking mountain here. But the other emotion I'm feeling is elation, because I found a bunch of books that I've been looking for a long time. The Lyndon Johnson book, The Feast of the Goat, Roadside Picnic. So I'm pretty happy about that. And I found some new books that I hadn't been really considering before this year, or before I saw them, and I'm excited to read those too. So let's see, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That is a very nice round number. And I plan on getting to 3 more this year, probably? And I've already read 2. So, if things all go according to plan, I'll be halfway through these 10 books by the time we get to 2026. So, I guess it's not all that bad. But anyway, thank you for watching me ramble about my recent acquisitions. I know the genres are all over the place. I've got art books, graphic novels, science fiction, history, critical theory. But, hey, I'm here to be varied and introduce people to an expanded horizon, so hopefully this video went some ways towards doing that. Hopefully I got you interested in some of these, and if you've read any of them, let me know, because sometimes it's lonely here on BookTube, and I just need to know that somebody's out there. Anyway, that's me. I've been deep in the reads. You've been you. And now it's time for us both to leave. Bye!